forth. So my presentation's tie to partnerships is I'm going to discuss the implementation of the San Joaquin County Multi-Species Habitat Conservation Open Space Plan that I'm going to just call the plan, because I don't want to have to say that over and over again. And also the partnerships that SJCOG has developed to implement the plans with local landowners and others, contractors in the area, and how we get those projects started. My role with SJCOG on the project is I'm an environmental consultant. We're contracting with SJCOG, and my role has been site evaluations for potential preserves, identifying enhancement measures, developing mitigation plans or management plans for the properties, working with contractors to implement the projects, and maintenance folks to oversee them, and also doing monitoring and reporting every year. So today I'll just go over, like I mentioned, the plan summary, and then plan implementation. The program says 1, but I'm doing 3 projects on the McCullamy, working downstream to upstream, the Hilder Preserve, the Nakagawa Preserve, and the El Rio Farms Preserve. So in case you're not familiar with habitat conservation plans, they're a mechanism for resolving conflict between development and the protection of endangered species. It allows for development to continue, not out of control, but to continue while mitigating the effects of endangered species. If you've been involved in the permitting process before, it can go on and on and on and on for a long time, and this is a way to facilitate that process. It's also a way to group preserves together to create bigger preserves instead of having little patchwork preserves all over the place. The HCPs are generally geographically large-scale plans. This one covers all of San Joaquin County, which is just about 1 million acres. You guys need to get another 1,000 acres somewhere to 100,000 acres will put you over the top. The county is divided into 5 index zones. I don't know if you can tell the colors out there. They're primarily based on different habitats. The green areas to the east are vernal pool zone, grasslands, kind of foothills habitat. Primary zone of the delta is the purplish color to the west. So a lot of the islands and rivers, a lot of agricultural land west of I-5. The central zone is the big blue area in the middle. Again, a lot of ag land, river systems, woodlands. The southwest zone, southwest corner, the pink area on the map, a lot of foothills, oak woodland, grassland, kit fox habitat, things like that. And then the last one, the little yellow strip there, is kind of the transition between the valley and the foothills. And this figure, as well as this one, are available on SJCOG's website. Currently, SJCOG is implemented and managing 21 preserves throughout the county, just about 9,900 acres, and most of them, as you see, are in the central zone. And if you go to the website, the blue parcels and then the red dots, you can click on those, and it'll take you to links that describe each of the preserves and what they have there. So under the plan, the HCPs are put together for target species, covered species. And they're either threatened or endangered at the federal or state level, or species of concern that maybe their populations are declining or there's habitat loss in the county. So 97 covered species. Again, I want to ask you, why didn't you get to 100? Could be 3 more out there somewhere. Covered species are typically tied to vegetation and habitat types. For example, Swainson's hawk in the county like to forage in row and field crops. So that's a key habitat for that species. The preserve types are based on the habitat types in each index zone. So there might be a preserve type for kit fox, it'd be grasslands in the foothills in the southwest area. For vernal pool species, it would be obviously vernal pools in the eastern part of the county. So the way it works is a project proponent, could be a developer, could be somebody else, identifies a project that they want to implement. So for example, say there's going to be a 100-acre development. They would come to Steve and identify the project. Steve would have somebody go out there, evaluate the land, and see what the habitat types are of the acreages out there. So, and then there's a fee per acre that's charged to the developer. So if there's 90 acres of row crop and the price is $1 per acre, can't do much with that, but I won't tell you the real cost, then developer would pay Steve that money, or give Steve that money. SJCOG would bank that and buy preserves and implement mitigation. So SJCOG's role in all of this is overseeing and managing the plan, implementing it, purchasing mitigation lands or conservation easements, developing preserve management plans for each preserve, implementing habitat enhancements, and then conducting compliance monitoring and long-term management. Some examples of preserve enhancements that have been implemented or could be implemented: riparian restoration, installation of hedgerows, wetland creation, pond expansion. We've done nest replanting, which are individual trees in certain areas, and installation of nest boxes. So the first property I want to talk about is the Hilder Preserve, which is near the downstream end of the McCullamy. So the preserve itself, and I have a better slide, is this area in here. Got the McCullamy on the south, Dry Creek to the north. Thornton is just off the map here, so I-5 is just over there to kind of give you a perspective on where it is. The preserve is one of the bigger ones that we have. It's 1,280 acres. The easement was purchased about 5 years ago with funds that SJCOG had gotten from developers. And I forgot to mention also that the funds that are gathered by habitat type are to be used to implement similar habitat types as preserves. So on the Hilder Preserve, we've got over 1,000 acres of irrigated pasture, so that's a major component of the preserve. And then there's a smattering of other habitats out there as well. And I remember the first time Steve and Kevin went out to this site. It's 1,200 acres, but there's also another 190 acres right here, a preserve, a different preserve. I remember driving out, getting out of the ranch house and kind of asking, well, what's the boundaries of this preserve? And it was down there, way down there, and it was just, I was amazed. 1,200 acres of open space that's going to be set aside. Yeah, it's big. So this figure just shows the different cover types. You can see with the tan color, most of it is aggregated or irrigated pasture. And just to prove it, there's some cows on irrigated pasture. For this preserve, there's 18 covered species. Swainson's hawk is a big one. There's a lot of foraging habitat, obviously. Velb, valley elderberry, longhorn beetle. I didn't list them all, but the species that I did list, pelican, crane, curlew, harrier, all of those have been observed on the site at one time or another. And the enhancements on this site are also going to benefit shorebirds, waterfowl, raptors, and a lot of riparian-dependent species as well that aren't covered species. So row and field crop preservation, as I mentioned, it's mostly irrigated pasture, and it has been for several decades, and managed that way. The current lease farmer, the owners aren't doing the work out there, is going to implementate, that's a good word, is the irrigated pasture has become somewhat degraded just over time. There's a lot of weeds out there. So he's going to implement a crop rotation pattern where he sets aside a couple hundred acres. He's going to put it in safflower, corn, tomatoes, whatever, a row crop to increase his agricultural production, get some variability in the crops, to improve irrigated pastures in other areas, kind of regrading those, some weed control. And then this will actually introduce habitat complexity because we'll have irrigated pasture and different times of the year we'll have fallow fields that species can forage in. Riparian and oak woodland preservation, and then wetland enhancement, which is going to be the focus here. And those enhancements were done, as I mentioned, it's been under production for a long time. Some of the water management facilities have degraded, so part of that is improving the water conveyance on the property, introducing some habitat complexity, and creating habitat. And one of the things about this plan, or any HCP, is the intent isn't to come in and tell them what to do with their land. It's not to say you need to grow alfalfa, you need to do this, but it because we want them to make the land productive. That's the idea. So within that, they have the flexibility to grow the crops that they need to or want to manage the land, as long as it provides habitat for those covered species. Swainson's hawks can't forage in orchard or vineyard, so the land use agreement is that they would not put it in that type of agriculture. And restoration on this project, this is part of the partnership. The ranch manager, or the lease farmer in this case, did all the site preparation for the restoration work, put in the water conveyance improvements, they graded the wetlands and planted, and they're maintaining it. And SJCOG did the construction oversight, will do the monitoring reporting, and they also go out every year and do biological monitoring as well to make sure that the habitat types that were promised are being maintained. So this isn't the greatest figure. This was the conceptual level plan for this area. The yellow areas were some of the old water conveyance channels that they keep dredging out, but they kept silting in, getting filled in with cattails. And it was really inefficient for them to move water around. They had a lot of flooding in the wintertime. So the idea was to improve some of those channels. Not all of that is part of the maintenance or the restoration component, but I just wanted to point that out. So in this particular area, this area was all really dense cattail and tule, which is great habitat, but again, from a water management perspective, it was hard to move water around. So part of it was excavating more of an open water area here, created more of an isolated island here, nesting, could be a nesting island, and then planting oaks and just kind of preserving that grassland so natural oak recruitment could happen. Once all these improvements are done, they're all fenced off so cattle don't access the site, so it can just regenerate into native habitat. So this is one of the, an example of the clogged channels out there that were cleaned up. This isn't what they look like, but it's kind of an idea. There would be more vegetation, wetland vegetation along the sides of these channels, but this is the only picture I had of a drainage. In this area is the open water complex that was graded out, opened up for some water. You can kind of see one of the channels going back in there. Although we lost the marsh habitat, there's open water habitat, so we've got waterfowl moving in there now. We've seen signs of otters out there. So it adds a habitat complexity given the the water's component. This area is located on the south side of the project site, and it's a stock pond basically where they hold water before moving it around the parcel. And the blue areas are small islands or berms that have a lot of vegetation on them. And for this plan, the idea was to grade some of these areas back, these annual grasslands back, to create wetland habitat. This is just a photo of the pond, and one of the things that were fixed under the project were there was a cracked concrete pipe down there to convey water, so it wasn't really working well. They had a lot of flooding, a lot of beaver problem, so they ended up replacing that, improving their water control facilities there. This is a picture of one of those small island areas. There's some annual grassland habitat off to the left of the photo. So the area to the left is an area that was regraded to create open water habitat and wetland habitat. So that's before, this is after. So the water area in the middle was all upland at one point. We planted emergent vegetation along the boundary, and eventually the plan is that some of that would fill in with cattail tule and some other vegetation. Because of the soils, it's been a little bit slower, but what we end up with is mudflat habitat out there. When the water levels fluctuate for irrigation movement, we end up with this great habitat. There's been dowitchers out there. These are greater yellow legs kind of in the middle of the photo. So it's a different habitat that you really wouldn't have out on this preserve otherwise. And this is the pond that we saw the pelicans on as well. What are we doing for time here? The Nakagawa Preserve is located approximately 6 miles east of Lodi off of Woodbridge Road. and it's also one of the larger preserves that we have. You can see this is the McCullum here. So the easement was purchased about 5 years ago. The funding on this, some of it came from SJCOG and some was from a grant from NRCS. The landowner acquired the grant and managed that and dealt with NRCS and all of that. The property itself is over 300 acres, but the conservation easement that we have is 288. Most of that is in row and field crop and currently in alfalfa. Sometimes they go to different crops. I'll show a picture in a minute, but the, press this to go back. No. The area to the south here, I should say the landowner built a levee there back in the 50s, mostly sandy material that they scraped off of the fields. So it's not very effective. And in most years, when the river's up, the area in the orange would flood. And they'd have to get in there and pump it to get the water out in order to grow crops. And then they wouldn't be able to start the crops until early summer in most years. So the idea was to isolate that area, create a berm that a grading contractor, local grading contractor did. Then some disking, seeding, and planting of native species. Installed a drip irrigation system to keep things going for a while. This has only been in a couple of years, so it's still being maintained, and the monitoring and reporting is done by SJCOG. 18 covered species for this preserve as well. A lot of them are the same, especially when you have row and field crops. So horned lark, which likes grassland areas, edges, a lot of raptors out there as well. And other species will be of the riparian preserve will be raptors and riparian dependent species. So the berm construction, approximately 3,000 feet long, was built a couple of years ago, finished up in the spring. It's going to result in a 50-acre riparian conservation easement. Seeding was done in 2010. Riparian planting was done 2010-11, and then plant maintenance is ongoing. There's a contract up to the end of this year. So this is the preserve again. This area in the yellow is mostly alfalfa, that darker signature that you see there underneath the yellow. This is the location of the berm that was built. And planting areas are kind of hard to see on here, but basically the green area was seeded, so it's more of a grassland feature. The area along the north side of the existing berm was planted with riparian vegetation. And then the oval shapes or clusters of riparian plants are about 200 by 100 feet wide. And this just shows this was taken from Google Earth. I have to sponsor them or no. In 1993, I couldn't find any older photographs, but if you look here, the river, from what the landowners used to say, the river would flood almost every year. And there's a bluff up here. It would flood all the way up there. They talk about trees floating up there every year. And you can see there was an island here. So there was an old oxbow feature. And unfortunately, that was all filled in to recoup the land for agriculture. But it gives you an idea of the flooding that occurred here naturally and what they were getting before we built the berm. And you know, obviously this was probably mostly riparian from the bluff down to the river at one point. So this is just a photo of the new berm. The ag field is to the left and the riparian area is to the right. This is taken from the McCullum, the existing levee berm. And the new berm is out the far end, just past the telephone poles that you see there. So that entire area, that's probably a third of the field. That's going to be the riparian restoration area, about 50 acres. So a couple of years ago, SJCOG installed 4,100 plants plus. Overstory vegetation was typical of the region, valley oak, interior oak, cottonwood. mid-story shrubs and understory. This isn't a complete list, but some of the species that are out there. And then again, it was seeded with a native grass mix. One of the things that we ran into out there was we planted and then we had a really high water level throughout the winter on the McCullamy, and most of that riparian area was inundated. So all the new plants, all the seed that went in there was covered with water for most of the winter into the spring, which was interesting because, well, the native grasses didn't do well, but spike rush, which is a common native plant, 50 acres. I don't know where the seed came from. It didn't overtop the banks. Maybe they had it in the seed mix by mistake. I don't know. But so first year survival, the monitoring was done last November, December. We did have some plant loss out there for some of the species just because it was inundated. You get a new plant, you stick it in the ground, and the container plant really doesn't have a chance to do much. And it's probably hard to see, but cottonwood survival, not surprisingly, was 100%. And, you know, the oaks did fairly well out there as well. One of the things that that did happen out there before we even planted, within a period of about 6 months, it was about 4 or 5 acres, I think, in the spring of 2010, it just sprouted out with cottonwoods. It was crazy. It was, we didn't even bother planting or seeding there because it was that dense. I mean, you kind of needed to wiggle your way through there. So it was great to see that natural recruitment, and the landowner said that, you know, if you don't maintain it, it's just going to grow. So, how am I doing? Okay. So the last one I'm going to talk about is the El Rio Farms Preserve. It is, again, on the McCullamy, on the south side there, and it's off of, on the east side of 99 off of Peltier Road. This is one of the older preserves. Planting's been in the longest, so you definitely see a lot more progress. And the purpose, well, one of the purposes of this particular site was to be an elderberry beetle jumpstart program, which was to implement a lot of elderberry shrub or elderberry beetle habitat in advance of project impacts. So basically this area went from vineyard to velb. Don't worry, they didn't tear out those old grapevines. They're still there. That's another property. But we did take out some. This isn't a great picture, but this is Highway 12 and 88 right there, just to give you a feel. And then Peltier Road's right about there, and Lockford is right in there. So the easement on this was required in 2005. Most of the area, you see the kind of the purple area around the border. That's the remainder of the property that's still in vineyard. So they worked out a land agreement, conservation easement with the landowner. And what we had to work with was there's an 8-acre area in here for riparian restoration. And then they also have an easement along the entire riverfront along McCullamy as a riparian preservation area. 15 covered species on this one. As I mentioned, velb was a big one, Swainson's hawk. Ringtail would be a good one in here, and kites. And again, riparian dependent species, a lot of passerines are going to use this area. This was just talking about partnerships. There were a lot of folks involved. Vineyard removal, the landowners were involved. California Conservation Corps did a great job with the giant reed removal. SJCOG contracted with the SLUES program, which is bringing high school kids out to do plantings. It was great experience. They planted, put in irrigation, birdhouses, all of that. And then we hired an irrigation contractor and a maintenance contractor, professional firms, to perform those features, and then there's ongoing performance monitoring. This is a photo of some of the arundo, the giant reed that was removed out there. It's pretty impressive. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the whole population because it's hanging off the riverbank. But these guys were out there with their saws just kind of roped in, hanging over, getting as much as they could. I don't remember how much. It was maybe 1/4 of an acre or half an acre, several locations along there. So that was pulled out. The vineyard owner burned it for us to get rid of the slash. And during the maintenance period, they continued to spray it as it came in, cut and spray it. 1,800 plants on this one. They've been in the ground, if I can do math, 5 to 6 years. Right. Yeah. Again, the focus was elderberry habitat. So a third of the species were elderberry, or a third of the plants were elderberry. And you'll notice a lot of the same species mix, species you typically see along the McCullough River. This was from the first year of monitoring, and it just gives you an idea. Each symbol is for all the different species there on the right. There's, I don't know, maybe 15, 18 species. And these were all GPS points. We didn't actually go out and map all of these, but just as we went along and monitored, we recorded a point to kind of show the distribution of plants. This site has been great. First year results for the overall plant survival for those 1,800 was 81%. Had a drop off the second year when we had some issues with the irrigation system. There was some replanting done, and it jumped back up to 70% of the plants survived. And elderberry seedling survival also, we expect it to drop down. Year 3, it was pulled off of irrigation, so it didn't have that. But when the plant count stopped, there were over 460 live elderberries on the 8 acres. Students also put in nest boxes, which they went up in the same day. There were tree swallows and bluebirds sitting on them. It was pretty impressive. As I mentioned, they SJCOG had students out there, so that's me when I had hair, giving a demonstration. And then the planting, we kind of had a mix there. We got Steve, I can't remember her name, but Fish and Wildlife, and then a couple of students out there putting all the plants in the ground. This is one of my favorite slides of all time. On the left, we had our company had a volunteer planting day out there, so we had a bunch of folks. So the photo on the left there, that's me, and that's my now 20-year-old son watching me work. You notice that? And over here we have my wife and my now 15-year-old son watching her, and I love that one because he's hands behind the back, heads down, kind of, making sure she's doing a good job. The gentleman on the photo to the left there is the vineyard manager. He manages several vineyards for the owner. And he came out and he helped put the boxes together. And this is a sort of a before and after photo looking down the road. Existing vineyards on the right, pre-planting. And this photo on the right was taken about 2 or 3 years ago. So we've had that much vegetative growth. You can see here the sign was put in obviously right after we planted, and this was taken a couple of years ago. It's mostly elderberry and oak behind the sign there. And that's Steve and I next to a coffeeberry last year, which I've never seen coffeeberry grow that big in 5 or 6 years. So I was really impressed with that. And I end with a rainbow. Oh, I told you I had a good one at the end. And this was coming back from one of the Southwest preserves, actually. So.
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.